Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So let me check my sound. I try to make it a habit to do that. While I'm checking my sound, guys, I want to I appreciate all of the support you guys give to the channel, whether it's watching the videos, whether you like it, share it, whether you give Super Cash, whether you give Patreon. All of it is appreciated. Thank you very much. Bernie Sanders. Let's talk about Bernie Sanders. So let me make sure I'm up first. Yes, I'm up. Bernard Foster, you too. Thank you, man. I honestly, I really do appreciate it. It's hard for me to get that across. I don't want to always say it because it comes across as being this kind of perfunctory thing. But it's true. I get up here and I speak my piece, and I try to push particular opinions with giving it a wider context and a wider narrative than what people typically give it. And there were people, I guess, who were like me on this particular wavelength that likes it. And because they like it, they support it. I'm saying your support is appreciated. It wasn't even something I knew. Whatever the stupid human trick is, it's being used in this particular way. It's being used in a fair way. Meaning, this is my own thoughts. This is me. This channel is just me. Thank you very much. Honestly, thank you. Let's talk about Sanders. So back in 2016, a socialist, and a socialist, the odd thing in and of itself, being in an American country, a socialist comes screaming out of political obscurity to, find every mic that he could scream into for a political revolution. He wants a political revolution. This country needs a political revolution. We need a political revolution. And millions upon millions upon millions of Bernie-crats, progressive, lefties, unabashed lefties, came out of political obscurity with him and signed up to the Bernie Brigade. They wanted that political revolution. Now, they charged at the Capitol itself, but they were undermined. It was illicit dealings and bad deeds undermined his particular stampede towards the kingdom, towards political power. That being said, he's still around. In fact is, Sanders enshrined something into the public consciousness that wasn't there prior. That these particular ideas, these lefty, unabashed, leftish ideas are popular. The most popular senator in this country gets that across since he is emblematic of those particular ideals. Now, that senator that screamed for the political revolution has a live town hall. Now, the live town hall is talking about income inequality in this country. That is awesome. I take no points away for that at all. This is something that needs to be brought up, and I love any opportunity to talk about class. Class is a major problem in this country, and it needs to be discussed as such. We're in the game space. For whatever reason, some people in the game space get massive amounts, while others not so much. Not to mention the social ills associated with that level of income inequality. But beyond it, besides the point, at least for right now. The socialist is... I like the fact that he's bringing this up. So he gets points for me for bringing this up. I like the fact that him and Elizabeth Warren are nailing this issue, saying income inequality, income inequality. We need to talk about the income inequality. I love this because it goes by the Russia talk. It goes directly to the point, the populist thing. Have you heard me say before? The thing that powers Sanders is people power to some degree. Sanders had 1.8 million people showing at that live town hall. Hillary Clinton could not fill an outhouse. That gets across this level of scale and popularity in regards to what this man is saying. He doesn't lose points for that. I hit him on his prescription. He's a socialist. He doesn't sound like a socialist when in regards to his prescription. I'm hitting him on his prescription. What he is using is a magnificent failure of imagination. If this is a political revolution, that is a magnificent failure of imagination. Let alone, it doesn't necessarily look into the main features of why our problem exists in the first place. It's, once again, it feels like they do political They look for political solutions for things that are technical solutions. They don't necessarily look into the reasons as to why before coming up with something to do about it. I'm going to show this part what I mean. Sanders' prescription needs to go beyond what Sanders is talking about. I'm going to let him talk about it, and I'm going to come in after and explain the problem with what he's saying. So again, yes, good job on having it from a standpoint of a prescription for how to change it, how to make things better, how to move forward, somewhere to go to, something. Fails. It utterly fails. And I would even go so far as to say empirically has failed. Let's take a look at Sanders.
We're very pleased to have with us Cindy Estrada. Cindy is a vice president of one of the great unions in our country, the United Automobile Workers. Cindy, thanks so much for being here. And when we talk about the decline of the middle class, clearly we're talking about the loss of 50,000 factories in this country since 2001, of jobs being sent abroad to China, etc., of workers now working for much lower wages than they used to, and the decline of the trade union movement. You want to say a few words about those issues?
You know, I was reading a study the other day that 9 in 10 Americans believe that manufacturing is going to rebuild the middle class. And it makes sense that people think that, because manufacturing jobs typically were associated with good jobs, but they were often union jobs. It wasn't because those jobs were given a really good wage because an employer decided to give it. You know, if you take my life, for example, you know, my father owned a bar in Detroit. Plants were by it. Union workers made high wages. They came into into his bar. They spent money. They had disposable income. So not only did union workers do well, but the non-union workers that came in there, their wages were higher because of the bargaining power of workers. And because of that, 5 of us were able to go to college because workers had good jobs, and businesses, like this video shows, had disposable incomes to spend. Their school systems were better. You know, but today people believe that because most manufacturing jobs today, you know, people think that you could, you know, raise a family like you used to be able to, that you could send your kids to good schools, that you could save for a retirement. But that's really not the case. Today, what's happening in this country with the decline in unionism is that you often have workers who are making, I just heard a figure, 600,000 workers in manufacturing are making $960 or less. 1.5 million manufacturing workers are making $11.90 or less. That means they're literally working for these wealthy corporations, working full-time, and then walking into a food stamp line. University of California, Berkeley did an amazing study that showed that 1/3 of manufacturing workers are in some form of subsidy. That means that $10.2 billion are going out to subsidize workers and to keep in mind that that's when companies are making billions in profits. It's not like these companies aren't doing well. They're doing well. Workers are subsidizing, us as taxpayers are subsidizing them. And then the other piece is, it's so important not to have a discussion on inequality without talking about workers' power if they're able to sit across the table from their employer and collectively bargain. And wages are never going to go up, even with this amazing fight for 15, which is so, the workers who did that, it wasn't even anyone's radar, so courageous. But even 15 isn't a living wage. It's not the wage that we grew up with. And so we have to have 15 in a union. Workers have to have a seat at the table, because if it's left up to employers, they're always going to make a decision on their bottom line. It's about their bottom line. They're always going to send it to their shareholders and corporations. So I agree with what you said. We can't leave it up to the private sector. Workers have to get a seat at the table. And how do we build that trade union movement again when employers are spending $1 billion a year fighting and union busting, fighting workers as they try to organize? Because 60% of workers want a union. So you ask, why don't they get one? They don't get one because they're being fired. They're being told that their jobs will go to Mexico, where they're competing with $3.95 an hour. In the auto industry, just to give you an example, as unions declined, the wages in the auto industry are declining 9 times faster than workers as a whole. And that's because as unions went down, wages went down, and we lost power. In politics, we lost power at the bargaining table.
Right. Elizabeth?
Well, so I just want to pick up on your point about unions. Look, I think it's clear. Unions built America's middle class. It'll take unions to rebuild America's middle class. I just think that's a core, I believe it, about workers. But
I'm not a fan of the political punchlines. I understand why they do them. what she said it's nonsense. It doesn't make sense. I mean, and I'm going to explain why. I want this to play a little bit more first. But ultimately, their prescription to what they're showing, this is this massive lack of resources some of the people in the society have, and showing it in real world terms, real human terms. Now, that's a problem with making a moral argument, because people don't necessarily, they're not going to have the same morality. There's some people who don't care about other human beings at all. Meaning they can look at that picture and say, those lazy bums, he's done it to himself. Those people exist. How do you get those people to look at this in a different way when they don't necessarily look at it in the same way that you do? You use a different argument. The argument needs to be public health, not so much the argument of morality. Yes, you use a morality argument, but the public health argument hits at this thing of what does it mean to be a human being, and can we have a society that allows people to be people? Not subjugated, not subordinate to somebody else in some kind of totalitarian company, but actual human beings with lives. Fact is, the conversation that Sanders is having is purely, at least it sounds like, is we need to go back to the 50s. We need to go back in time to the unions. Look, in the same way that Donald Trump says make America great again, that the place that he's talking about doesn't really exist. The place that Sanders is talking about no longer exists. We are on a fundamentally different playing field than what we were in the 50s. And your going back to the 50s is not going to answer that problem. The question is, my question, why do we need a New Deal? Why on earth do we need a New Deal? If the first New Deal was supposed to be fucking awesome, why do we need a second one? And wouldn't answering why we need a second one have to be factored into the answer for trying to do something else and doing something different to still advance those similar goals? Let's take a listen to a little bit more there of Elizabeth Warren, because I don't want her to end on just a political talking note. That would be unfair to Warren. Let her make a point.
I just want to look at some of the numbers around what's happened to America's middle class. You watch America coming out of the Great Depression, kind of 1935 forward. You watch GDP doing this, and you watch America investing in the things that help create a middle class, investing in education, investing in infrastructure, investing in basic research, the things that help us go forward, doing all of this based on progressive taxation.
By the way, just to be clear, they're doing those things purely for the profit motive. That has nothing to do with the public sector itself. I mean, ultimately, you invest in a product because you want to make profit from that particular product. It's always this cost-benefit analysis that you're working with. Yes, they did that. Let her finish first. I don't want to stop her groove.
Those who have more pay a fair share and help pick up the ticket for that. And what happens 1935 to 1980? The 90% of America, everybody not in that top 10%, the 90% of America gets 70% of all new income growth in this country. Yeah, the rich did better, but everybody did better. Upper middle class, middle class, lower middle class, working poor, poor. Everybody was lifted because we were investing in opportunity. You watch that change in 1980. What happened in 1980? While Reagan gets elected, we moved to trickle-down economics, cut taxes for those at the top, and start cutting back on investments in opportunity. So what happened?
And firing the air traffic control.
Fire the air, exactly. Break the unions. Yes. So union membership had been strong. Now what happens? One of the first moves of the Reagan administration is to break the union that actually helped support it and help him get elected. So what happens then? Here's the deal. GDP keeps going right on up. It's gone up in time one, 1935 to 1980, 1980 to 2017. Continues to go right on up. Where is the key difference when you stop making those investments in opportunity? The 90% of America, everybody not in that top 10%, how much of all that new income growth did they get? Answer, 0. 100% of it goes to the top 10%. So what happens in America? Wages just flatten out, and all those expenses, all those core expenses like housing and healthcare and getting your kids educated, transportation, childcare, those costs shoot through the roof, and the family gets caught in the squeeze. And so the family that a generation ago could make it on one income now can't make it on two incomes because those incomes have been so depressed relative to the rest of the expenses. Bernie knows because we've talked about this 100 times, but this was a big part of the research I did about families who go bankrupt. What was the narrative in America? People go bankrupt because they spent too much time at the mall. No, they spent too much time at the doctor's office. Our research was about medical bankruptcy, people who went broke because they lost their jobs, people who went broke because of a death or divorce in the family.
Michael, I'm sorry.
Hollows out America's middle class.
All right, Michael grew up in a city which maybe represents all of this, and that's Flint, Michigan. Mike,
Yep.
what have you observed over the years from Flint?
Well, back when I was growing up in Flint, Michigan, nearly every
All right. So they made their point. Their main thrust of their argument is we need unions back. We need to go back to the 30s and 40s and 50s because that was the time where unions were strongest and that's the time where wages were highest. Now, they're right in the sense. I don't want this to be a hit to unions. Look, the labor wars, the things that were done to unions were despicable by the capitalist class. Unions fought back, and for all intents and purposes, our gains in regards to workers, our plantations that we apparently choose, have been because of them. They have been a necessary permutation in the way we went about our affairs, and they have been a necessary and an awesome one. Now, that being said, going back to the 40s or the 30s or the 50s, can we do better than that? Like, in the same way we hit Trump's people saying, going back to the 50s because they think that was the awesome time for whites. Can we dispatch with this idea that going back to the 30s and 40s is going to, A, is somehow possible, and B, is the furthest that our imagination can reach in regards to a political revolution? I think we can do better than that. Fact is, I asked the question of why do we need a New Deal because that question is completely relevant to what's taking place. You're having this conversation on income inequality and you're trying to come up with solutions to deal with income inequality. At one point, there were measures put through that tried to stem the income inequality. Now, I'm asking, what happened to those measures? Why do you need a New Deal? I'm making a point that any deal, any arrangement that you come up with needs to break that measure. It needs to stop that process that ripped away those gains that were taking place in regards to leveling the playing field, but at the very least, helping the American public. And I'm talking about Roosevelt's era. Because Roosevelt wanted to have a workers' bill of rights also. So I'm making this point. What pulled against that? What was the thing that changed that? And not just that, what were the thing that broke the New Deal as it is? Any conversation that you're having about income inequality and making substantive changes to address the income inequality has to deal with that factor, because that factor is going to be there to rip away any gain that you come up with in your New Deal. You have to take into account. You need to break the fingers of whoever is at the lever that tries to get back the gains that you've made from a leftist standpoint. One thing. The United States had a dramatic, what's the word I'm looking for? It had a dramatic advantage over the rest of the world with regards to its companies, capital. Keep in mind, there were 2 world wars in Europe. Europe had been completely devastated. So it makes sense that in a system where the companies weren't necessarily global, meaning they were within the borders of the country, they could exceed, or they could be caught with taxation and policy to that point, and they, for some degree, saw themselves as American companies. And you had a situation where business was booming because abroad was destroyed, and they were using us in some degree for their supplies. So you can kind of see how, yeah, that's an anomalous time in our American history. But understand, the moment corporations, look, they exist to make profit. They exist to maximize their gains. And they're going to maximize their gains by 1 or 2 ways. They either need to get the raw materials cheaper or they need to get labor cheaper. Now, within this arrangement, even in the era that she was talking about, labor companies were looking for ways to undermine labor, because labor, if they're in unions, are expensive. Meaning the fight for workers' wages and everything else has a conflict built into it. Labor is trying to get as much as it possibly can get, while the corporation or the company itself is trying to get as much as possible as it can get. Their objectives conflict with one another. Their objectives conflict with one another. Now, that being said, between these two forces, the corporations have an amazing advantage. I mean, A, they're the ones who employ, that's the first part. B, they own that company, meaning they own the plantation. Everybody else is working for their ends. They don't care about the social impacts of what they do. They're working at this particular company, and their mentality is based in this particular company, regardless of the societal impact. They also have this advantage, though, of cash, meaning influence. Yes, unions used to work with the Democratic Party, but let's be honest, that's not really the case anymore. Whereas corporations can push and pull Republican legislation, or Republicans, meaning Republicans are just obsequious to cash, they do the same to Democrats, meaning Democrats are also obsequious to that cash, meaning you've allowed this institution where these guys can pull the political apparatus. Now, I understand some people will say, well, unions also have a seat at the table. Unions do not have a seat at the table anymore. In fact is, Republicans have moved so far to the right that they've become so antagonistic towards unions that unions find their saviors in Democrats. Now, I've made this analogy of this being, an abused spouse, the political abused spouse. It doesn't matter what you do. I'm staying with you. He has a really good heart. And at some point, I'll be able to get to him and get these policy changes. But ultimately, the only thing you end up with is he slaps you, he beats you, he drinks too much, he doesn't wash his hand when he fixes your sandwich. At the end of the day, he has sex with the maid. You caught him having sex with the maid. And yet and still, you stay. Yet and still, you stay. And my analogy here is representative of the Democratic Party. Not only do they pass NAFTA, they try to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership. They don't put through the Employee Free Choice Act. Ultimately, the relationship between you two is not even. You're clinging to Democrats because you're terrified of Republicans, meaning that Democrat, carte blanche, gets your support. You get nothing out of the deal. The only thing you get out of the deal is apathy, whereas Republicans are going to come after you. So this is not the same thing as an equal relationship. And for whatever support unions gives to Democrats, corporate America also gives support. And I guarantee you the support they give is more. And I guarantee you the support they gives, it sounds more, meaning it gives a louder resonance, seeing as unions themselves are essentially tied to this thing of being fearful of Republicans. Meaning the union itself is not voting this full-throated support of Democrats in a way that they are giving full-throated support because they believe Democrats are representing their interests. They're giving full-throated support to Democrats purely because they're terrified of Republicans. There's a difference in supporting somebody because you love what the person is saying versus being fearful of somebody else. Fact is, because you're fearful of the other person, it allows a Democrat to get away with a lot of stuff because your eye is purely on the other person. These guys are bribing your political apparatus. And in paying off this political apparatus, they're curbing and moving the laws to their interests. Of course they're going to do that. Why wouldn't they do that? If your job is to make money, is to maximize your profit, and you're functioning with a game space that says, I am going to maximize my profit, at some point, you're going to go after the things that are limiting your profit. So yeah, you're going to fund candidates who are union busters. Yeah, you're going to fund candidates who are soft on unions, meaning for the Democratic side, meaning they're not necessarily going to do anything about unions, but they're not also going to do anything to help them or protect them. Cash is the other problem in the way this is arranged. There's a magnificent failure of imagination here, honestly. So if you look at the problem and you analyze the problem to be cash or the profit motive, essentially maximize my profit. A corporation, it makes all the sense in the world that if they can get labor for dirt cheap or even free, they're going to get labor for dirt cheap and even free. It also makes sense in the world that if they could automate and save cash from that automation, they would do so. The goal of the company is not to hire people. The goal of the company is to maximize their profits. How can we make more money? This will have corporations like Walmart have dead peasants insurance, where people who die on the job, Walmart will have an insurance policy on those people who died. Now, that's gross. That's extremely grotesque. But again, the company is a machine. It's a legal fiction designed purely to maximize cash. How it does it is less picky. It has nothing to do with the workers. That's what I'm getting across. The workers' interests and the company's interests are aligned in some respects, but they're also in conflict because the owner and the person who owns that company wants to get as much out of it as possible, and the workers want a piece of that share. I want to add numbers to what these guys were saying because it really is stark what we allow. Just 8 men own the same wealth as half of the world. 63% of Americans don't have enough savings to cover a $500 emergency. 95% of the wealth since 2009 has gone to the top 1%. Now here's the thing. I've already given my full-throated support of unions, so there's that. My problem with what she's saying is there's no imagination associated with it. Like, ultimately, we need to go back to what we were doing before. But that didn't work. Explicitly, it didn't work because we're in this situation that we're in now. If what worked prior, meaning if what took place worked, we would not be having this conversation about needing a New Deal. You need something different, Sanders. You need something different, Warren. And you needed to have a little bit more imagination. What about worker co-ops? Worker co-ops eliminates this idea of friction between management and the elite because there is no elite in that process. The workers themselves run and own that particular company. That immediately raises wages because workers are going to pay themselves a decent wage. And you get rid of this alienation that people have at their job space. They take ownership. They take part of that particular job and they have votes in regards to where that company goes. Now, yes, this is still a company, meaning if you're a socialist or something like that, you're still dealing with this kind of corporate enterprise. But it also means that the workers themselves own the means of production. You eliminate the elite in the process. Unions always has that friction built into the process itself with these guys working across purposes with one another. This removes that. You just have the workers themselves running it. What about using the government to support services that creates worker co-ops? So if you're going to have a green energy revolution, the companies that you employ, should be worker co-ops. How about that? How about if the company doesn't exist, make it, assist it, give investment towards it. If a company is going to leave the country, what about making a law saying that you have to, at the very least, give over to your workers or give your workers a chance to purchase the company? Meaning, if they're going to sell to somebody in China, they at the very least have to offer their workers the opportunity to buy the company. And also agree that the government will front them the cash. I'm saying, if you're going to say a political revolution, make it a political revolution. Actually give solutions to these things, not just things that take us back in time to the mythical place that doesn't currently exist. What about resources belong to the people of the country itself? Meaning, West Virginia was a powerhouse with regards to the coal industry at one point. And yet, it's 48th poorest in the United States. That should never have taken place. The resources of West Virginia should belong to the people of West Virginia, meaning those people, to whatever degree companies are reaping the benefits of those resources, should also go back to the people in some kind of universal basic income. It is grossly unfair that they can rape the country in that way. And that's not just West Virginia. That's in one place after the next, after the next, after the next. If you're looking for a way to get a universal basic income, I would say start at the resources of those countries belonging to the people of those countries, of those states. Yes, that's a revolutionary thing to say, but Alaska was doing it. Meaning the oil in Alaska was coming back as a basic income to the people of Alaska. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was definitely something. And yeah, any amount helps. Find interesting ways to tax, whether you want to talk about Wall Street or whether you want to talk about speculation, however you want to do it. Come up with a way to give a universal basic income. I'm talking about directly influencing poverty, directly destroying poverty. Yes, work is a part of that, but what about the people who don't or can't work? I'm talking about getting rid of poverty entirely. What about an employment guarantee? Now, that would be profound. Now, whatever you want to use in order to pay for these programs, I don't care. I don't care. If you want to do the presidential $1 trillion coin where you just sit in Fed and direct the Fed to pay it off, I don't care. Money is not real. Resources are. However you need to do it, that's what you put out. Meaning that's the argument that you make for these things. Not necessarily going back to the 40s and 50s. You're talking about going to a new place altogether in ways that actually and dramatically get rid of poverty. Substantially get rid of poverty, if not completely eradicate poverty. Understand, the employee guarantee has two extreme benefits. On one hand, anybody that wants a job gets a job. That job is redirected to fixing up America. Each state, each local area code, whatever those adjustments, changes, fixes, tweaks, those things can be done by an employee workforce that goes throughout the United States, fixing up the United States. Again, you're employing people. And what's better than that? You don't have to have this hard level of a minimum wage, because people's minimum wage will automatically rise to meet the government's minimum wage. Otherwise, why take a job at the Burger King not paying you a decent wage when you can get the job at the government paying you a decent wage? They're better solutions. That's my point. I'm not saying I have all the answers to this, but going back to unions is not the answer. For jobs and companies now that have unions, yes, pass employee free choice, making it easier for people to declare unions and protecting those people when they declare unions. But if you're talking about taking a step into the future and moving beyond what we currently have, unions, it's not about just unions. Yes, healthcare will be an amazing thing for that. Education will be an amazing thing for that. And by the way, healthcare and education, we already offer education from the standpoint of K through 12. What is the difference with adding another 4 years to that and allowing that to be open to anybody who wants to go to school? Allow that. Allow us in this society to get an education without necessarily penalizing the people to get an education. How many people would get degrees if those degrees weren't necessarily something they had to break their backs in order to pay for? I mean, come on. The incentives in this is backwards. Yes, we should have healthcare because, yes, we can afford healthcare for each and every person in this country. I'm making a point. Poverty at this point is a choice between automation, and that's another point. Automation. This. Now, say for the moment that Bernie Sanders wants his people, his union, $15 an hour. The person who owns that burger joint says, you know what, I'm done. I'm folding. You're all fired. And not just you're fired. I'm adding a burger flipping machine to replace a human being there. That's possible now. Maybe not so much back then. It's possible now. And just to show that it's possible now, there's already a burger flipping robot in service. Flippy, the burger flipping robot, is now working alongside humans at Cali Burger. Fact is, I don't want a human being flipping a hamburger. I don't want all the magnificent potential that makes up a human being to be boiled down into this plantation servant that flips hamburgers. If you can find Flippy the robot to do it, let Flippy the robot do it. The problem here is not the fact that Flippy the robot is doing it. The problem is the way our society is arranged, where the person and the worker is penalized by having a robot do a particular task. Our basic needs should not be tied to labor. That's my point. If you're born in this society, you should be supported by the society, at the very least in the basic raw needs. I would guarantee you it would be a less violent society. It would be a less aberrant behavior in that society. Going back to another point. The corporation back in those days were local to the United States. That's not the case anymore. With these trade deals, corporations can move and leave if the government tries to restrain or retain certain powers on those companies. So yeah, that company can move to Mexico. That company can move to China. And because of the trade deal, ship those goods and services back across the United States. There's nothing to stop them from doing it. In fact, you can fire all those workers and pay the people in those countries maybe $3 an hour. The normal rate being $1 an hour in a country. Well, these guys think, oh my God, this is an awesome job. I'm getting $1.50 more than what we're typically getting. Yeah, but you fired that American worker. You fired all those American workers. I make it a point we're in a different political space. It's not the same. And the solutions that you're coming up with have to accommodate the new political space that you're in. And it also needs to take into account, how do you prevent this kind of continued existential struggle between capital and labor? You need to break the fingers of whatever's trying to claw back those gains. That's my point. My issue with this is not that Sanders had this town hall. I love the fact that he had the town hall. I love the fact that he's talking about labor. I love the fact that he's talking about unions, because unions are a magnificent part of the workforce. He needs to go further, though. That's my point. That's my only point. If you're saying political revolution, make it a political revolution. Make it a real revolution. Go further. Go to the heart of the issue. At some point, you're going to have to acknowledge that the problem is capitalism itself. Like, these people who are head of these companies, who are making all of this money, who's paying off the politicians, they're not doing it because they're crazy. They're not doing it because they're mean. They're doing it because the goal in this system is to maximize profit. And that's what they're trying to do, maximize their profit by reaching their hands into the political space. So, gold star for calling attention to income inequality. Not so much for a solution. And by the way, the automated solutions thing, that's going to get worse. And it's not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing because of the way we view these things. Meaning, there's self-driving cars right now in California. At some point, those self-driving cars are going to be solar powered. They're going to go to a stall to get recharged, and they're going to go back out automatically. No need for a driver. Somebody on their cell phone says, I need a car. The car has programming to go pick them up, take them from point A to point B. The car gets low on gas. It hits programming and sensors to tell it go to the solar panel, charging booth. It finishes the charging and it goes back up. There's no human in the process. How long before that spreads to the rest of America? How many cabbies and Uber drivers and Lyft drivers are going to be out of work just based on typical automation? Same way as elevator operators were put out of work. Drivers at some point is going to be put out of work. And what are those people going to do? The problem here is not the fact that you have automated cars. The problem here is all of these things are owned by 1%. Meaning you have an automated society, but you're at the behest of these 1% owners, which is kind of insane, because ultimately this is common heritage. Like, whatever the game space that allows them to come up with some reasoning where we would give them massive amounts of income like this, ultimately we have to take into account that there is a societal toll for allowing them to get the resources to that degree and allowing them to own the means of production in the way that they own the means of production, meaning there's one tiny percentage of people owning all of the resources like this. That's the issue we need to deal with. Like, ultimately, it's not the fact that they're cars that are automated. It's how we orient ourselves to that. Like, that's a negative. Our society should be organized in a way where that's a positive. So, again, go star for Sanders for bringing it up. F or D- on solutions. Unions are fucking awesome, but unions were what was used in the past. Certainly there's something better at this point, or better ideas. Let's see, Nicholas Shadowski. The same concept applies to Nestle with taking water. It belongs to citizens of the nation, not the company. Yes, agreed. Absolutely agree. Universal basic income because Andromeda has it. Why can't we? Balthazar 228. Municipal internet and municipal phone data. Hashtag 1GBPS for all. I agree with you, man. A lot of this stuff, I am for more government intervention in this. We need to organize ourselves in a particular way. Our planet is falling the fuck apart. Like, if you want to keep this kind of political apparatus, fair enough. But at the very least, you have to acknowledge the scientific realities that our current system is destroying our world. It's done in this kind of weird, it's almost like sleepwalking way. So a person has a kid, takes that kid, I'll use me as an example. My mom wakes up, she's a single parent, barely making ends meet. It started the job when she was like just getting out of school, in house school that she worked in. So they always paid her a low wage. And working like 20 years at the company, making like $12 an hour. Like, I'm trying to get across this thing of a poverty wage. Now, in doing that, you're raising a kid. And raising a kid, you're driving him to school. We're stopping to get something to eat. Polish hot dog. Now, when I'm getting this Polish hot dog, my mom, there's no malice built into this. Did they torture that animal? Yes, they probably tortured that animal. Did the waste material from that animal go into disturbing the environment? Yes, it did. Half of the global climate change is for animal agriculture, meaning me eating that contributes to some small measure to the climate change problem, to ecological collapse. I'm trying to make this point that it's done in this almost passive way. It's so bizarre. It's really bizarre. UBI's Milton Friedman neoliberal policy. Nope. Rob Lenoy's. Rob, the reason I say the universal basic income, not to live off, at least not initially. It's not that I want the system itself to change. But fact is, between the system itself changing, I want to get rid of certain things in a society. Poverty is one of those things I want to get rid of. Now, understand the UBI is not going to be enough for the people to completely live off. It's just an assistance. It just helps. It's just something. It's like a factor of you're a person, and because you're a person, we're going to help you out. We want you to have a decent life, at the very least have decent access to the things that you need. Now, I don't think anything is wrong with that at all, because ultimately I want people's needs to go away. I want people to have access to the basic things of life. Clean air, clean clothing, shelter, sense of fulfillment, affirmation. I want them to have those things. Now, I need to get rid of the basic needs of the individual, meaning healthcare, education, a place to stay. And then what does the society look like when those basic elements of a person's life are gone? Those people are not going to vegetate. Those people are still going to work. They're still going to go out and do things. They're still going to make a living. They're still going to do all those things. This is not even overturning the capitalistic system, but at the very least, it makes sure everyone has access to the things that they need. Now, moving on to the other part, climate. There's no changing climate without dealing with the capitalistic system itself. Meaning, an oil company is not going to change its behavior because it's terrified that the planet is going to come to collapse. The oil company makes money off of the thing that causes planetary collapse. So it's going to continue to make money because within the game space to which it exists. That's a good thing. For the rest of us, not so much. They don't care about the external costs of the way they go about their affairs and business. We should, though. My argument to a lot of this stuff boils down to well-being. There's no such thing as human well-being in a planet that's been despoiled, in a planet habitat that's been decayed or that's being undermined. How can you have, and this is for libertarians, like, if you're going to be free, what does that mean to be free? You know, if you don't have access to the things that you need, are you free if you don't have healthcare, if you don't have education, if you don't have money to get decent food and decent clothing and a decent place to stay? Is that still freedom? Not so much. I'm making a point that the term of freedom, I would make the argument, is having access to the basic things that you need, and from that point on, live your life. If a UBI does that, I'm okay with that. If there's some edifice in government that makes sure people have homes, I'm okay with that. I want to get rid of the basic needs because I think those are the things that hold back our society. You should have poverty in a country where all of this money, it's like this country has more wealth than any other country in the world. There's no reason to be living in third world conditions in the United States. Zero. And you shouldn't have this situation where people are struggling, people are barely making ends meet, and half of the country is poor or living on a poverty wage. None of that should take place. None of that should take place. I want to eliminate poverty. Meaning if a person is going to get into office and they're going to really believe things, and they really want to get rid of poverty, not this bullshit democratic thing, but actually want to get rid of it. Employment guarantee and UBI together is an amazing step forward to do such. Also, I would add in getting a house. I want people's basic needs met. I think people can be free when their needs are met. That's what I think. That's what I think. Balthazar 228. Internet is now a utility and required. Having internet is required now in modern America. Phone data is necessary for the public safety through 9/11. Now, that's an interesting argument. Now, keep in mind, all these things are just arguments. That's an extremely interesting argument. Balthazar 228. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. It is a utility, right? I mean, I'll take any calls on this. Let's see. What did you guys think about the town hall? If you're a patron, feel free to call in if you want to call in. Balthazar, your Domino's app can find you more often than 9/11. That's funny. Yeah, but what about Stormy Daniels, damn it? JT, let's deal with the main issues. D. Martin. Rob Lenoir's UBI argument will then be to get rid of government programs. Rob, I understand. No, I agree with you. I do agree with you on that point. It's threading a needle. If it's universal basic income and getting rid of government programs, then no, I'm not for it. It needs to be somewhat separate and distinct. The reason why I don't like calling it a UBI, but UBI is the thing that people know when they hear it. I like to call it this thing where, I don't know the name that I want to give it, but what it boils down to is the resources of the United States belong to the people of the United States. And as such, any usage of those resources should give back to the people of the United States. Now, this is an extraordinarily rich country in resources, meaning there should be nobody who's in poverty or hungry in this way. Now, yeah, if you make a certain amount over the threshold, I would say you don't get the money for that. There's no point in giving people who earn like $500,000 a year an additional thing. But if those people ever lower their income, then yeah, they would get it also. It's for each and every person just for living in this country because it's common heritage. It's common heritage. But yeah, I'm not for it replacing stuff. It's almost like something that you get just for being alive and just for being born here in the States. It's not a replacement. It's one of those things that it's acknowledging that you as a person, we want you to be taken care of and we want you to have access to the things that you need. And we want to do something that goes forward in helping that. And the way that we go about forward helping that is asserting with a certain amount of legitimacy that the resources of the United States are for the people of the United States. After all, we're the people that live here. And they should not be able to be given and bargained away in the way that they have been in this kind of crony capitalism. The money should go back to the people themselves. So it's not you being given something. It's for all intents and purposes you getting something that you're owed. There's a difference in the way that people look at those things. At least that's my argument. Job guarantee means an end to unemployment, earned employment. You either work for government or industry or you get nothing. Earned unemployment, yes. Jamal, look up Richard Wolff talking about universal income. He has a good argument. I have seen that. So I've seen Richard Wolff's argument for it. His main point is, look, you have an odd arrangement of your society, and that's the problem. Given the universal basic income doesn't change the arrangement in the way that you've organized yourselves. It's almost like trying to mask it in some way. And you still keep that conflict of one class working and the other class receiving. Now, I would say the UBI would go to everyone. It's not one of those things that you break apart and everything else. Everybody gets it. It's fair game for everyone. But I understand what he's saying. It's like Richard Wolff's thing is get rid of the main conflict that's in your society. And that's management versus workers. And I agree with him. That's why I make the point of saying worker co-ops. Because I agree with him. He's right. Get rid of the elites. Get rid of the people who are, get rid of this capacity to influence the political system. Create a more even and more equitable society. It almost spreads like an antibody of sorts where it goes from person to person, or company to company to company. And also pass Employee Free Choice Act, allowing other companies that are private, unions to form in those companies. If those companies ever want to go bust, they can offer themselves up to be sold into a worker co-op. I agree with Richard Wolff totally on this. But that's a separate and distinct thing from a universal basic income. And again, let's not call it a universal basic income. Call it a living allotment. A living allotment. You were born in the United States. Congratulations. We value you as a person, in which case the resources that are in this particular country, here's your share. That's what I want to call it. Joshua Renshaw, that have huge profit margins because they don't care. Why not? It's basically money you'll lose if you use it. It's a way for the government to pay food companies using poor people as a conduit. A lot of the stuff is that. A lot of the stuff is that. where they're using like fig leaves of things. My point to this is, if you want to solve it, solve it. Stop dicking around about it. Republicans don't care about the debt. Democrats don't care about the poor. That's the thing that I've asserted. Now, I believe Sanders cares, but for whatever reason, his imagination is stuck in the confines of the 30s and 40s. And we are beyond the 30s and 40s. It's time for something new. Worker co-ops. I would start at worker co-ops. Yes, healthcare. Yes, education. Yes, all that's absolutely true. But in poverty, employee job guarantee. In poverty, get rid of poverty. Your society will flourish, and I guarantee you, in ending poverty, other negative externalities, whether you want to talk about gun violence or aberrant behavior in the society itself, will probably go down. Once you ease the friction of that society, you ease the vulnerabilities of the people in that society, some of the stuff will go down. My argument has been in the past that a lot of the things that we deal with, or you could say the aberrant behavior of human beings, is not really aberrant behavior. It's aberrant from our context. But if they're behaving a particular way, something is influencing them to behave that way. He's not acting as an agent unto himself. He's acting as an agent in coordination with the company, with the country itself, or with his society. My point is, it solves other issues. It solves other issues. And while I applaud Sanders for doing this, it's slightly off. It's slightly off. It's old-fashioned. A little bit more imagination. But gold star for trying. Alright guys, I'll end it here. Let's see, I thought it was somebody else. Balthazar, what about standardizing housing costs in the United States? Terry J123, that's a moral argument. Make up your mind, Jamal. What's a moral argument? Well, I think both arguments work, Terry. Like, it's my issue here is not that you can't make a moral argument. You can make a moral argument, but the argument that's going to win home is going to be more so on personal benefit, like societal benefit. You can do both. They don't conflict with one another. I'm saying in this segment, all of the argument that Sanders made in this case was somewhat a moral argument. I don't see why both conflict with one another. They don't conflict. Sorry, Jamal. It was the second part of a two-part thought that you were reading. Oh, my bad. Nicholas Sardowski. Jamal, on a non-political video, I'd like for you to analyze Secular Talk's philosophical view on free will versus determinism. It is indeed a fantastic topic. Okay. Free will. Yeah, I don't believe we have free will. I mean, ultimately, there's a workable point of view in you, but even that workable point of view, to some degree, is endowed based upon your culture, your society, your world, what you consider to be your world and your society, because understand this idea of what society is always a little bit hazy. We never actually know what it is. We just have this image in our head of this particular thing that just formed when we said the words. But all those things are invested in you. All those things are dumped into you. You're reacting to something. It's not just you being a dandelion. Fact is, you are inextricably linked to your environment. It just is. I know people like to feel like they have free will and choice and everything else, but actively, usually, what they're responding to is an emotional push or pull for a particular reason in a particular direction. It's just a push and pull. Now, they will come up with reasons why they did X or why they did Y, but ultimately the insinuating thing from that is this kind of emotional base of do this. That emotional thing is articulated into how that person behaves. Now, no one quite knows where that comes from. The person functions, the person acts, the person is doing things. The person will come up with reasons why he's doing things. But the thing in him that pushed him to do that, it's a workable point of view. Now, that workable point of view, however, again, is not created just by itself. It is interacting with the space in the world around it. I'm making a point that I don't think there's such a thing as free will. It may not necessarily be completely, I don't think there's such a thing as free will. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, if a person is behaving a particular way, they're doing it for a particular reason. They're nudged and pushed. But I don't think people are robots either. I think there's some cases that are purely deterministic just based upon the pattern that the person is in. Like, the situation, And the reason I say this, you can't talk about human beings without talking about the environment to which those human beings exist. So Bob being born and raised on a Vulcan is fundamentally different than Bob being born and raised in California versus born and raised in a Japanese, samurai era. He's different in all of those cases. Now, there may be a workable point of view in Bob, that kernel of something in Bob, but the way that grows and blossoms is purely dependent upon the society itself. So meaning, even the workable point of view that you use to engage the world is tainted by the world itself. It is difficult, if not impossible, to understand where you begin and where the world ends, and where that distinction even exists. My thought is, anytime something takes place, meaning some tragic event or some big event, you do have to ask, especially when it continuously happens over and over and over again, what is it with your society that is causing this behavior? I do think how we organize ourselves, in many respects, dictates how we behave. It's like a Plinko chip to some degree. You experience things as the Plinko chip goes down, you see, you analyze and everything else, but ultimately you're still just the Plinko chip going down based upon the path that society has carved out. We have a capitalistic system. We have this dog-eat-dog system where maximizing your profit matters more than anything else. And in this case, you can predictably see human beings being subordinate to the system itself. I'll look at the video, and the topic is interesting. I've become more in line with the camp that your environment dictates the individual. Like, it's like you're only as moral as your society allows you to be, or your access to goods allows you to be. You can be pretty damn moral when you have all of your needs met. Not so much when you need to get by, or when you need to do whatever you need to do to get by. Nukes! Jay Scott. Kevin Tipcorn. Unions and groups of people operating in a democratic mandate, they are vulnerable to problems, but being ruled over by a boss is a guaranteed screw over. Don't like leadership. Agreed. Robert Bouquet Ray. Even us putting on deodorant every morning is a reflection of how the society dictates individual behavior. And another thing, there's the test. I've shown this test before, where the society can get the individual to lie or get the individual to fall in line with what they want, even when that individual knows the society is wrong. 33% of the time, the individual would lean towards the direction of the society, even when they know the society is wrong. They tell themselves, maybe they know something that I don't. It's the force of the group. So, yeah. Look up Noam Chomsky argument, Jamal. Okay. I'm 100% sure that Jamal knows and has read plenty of Chomsky's. Yeah, I have. I don't remember his lecture on this, so I would have to look it up. But I've seen him talk about this. Everyone fight Trump. We're so fucked. Yeah, see, right there. He's making a point, and he's right. You're talking about like all of this stuff that's big, that's important, that deals with human beings. Bernie Sanders was able to get 1.8 million people to show up to this thing. You're talking about real things that matter. Now, everyone was pissed off when he was talking about Russia. Now he's back to the populist message. You're talking about things that matter, and people love him talking about it. You have Democrats screaming Russia. They don't want to talk about these things. These things hurt their donors. They want to talk about these things. They want to talk about Trump, because Trump allows it obfuscates. It allows them to focus purely on him without seeing their own fuck-ups, foibles. And up to this point, that's worked. They've been able to get one person after the next in these elections that under normal circumstances, Democrats probably wouldn't win. As a political gimmick, I guess you could say it's effective. Clinton was able to tarnish him enough with the Russia thing. The rest of the Democrats and the media were able to carry it along. They were able to influence the public into believing that there was something here, even though, and obfuscate from the real issue, dealing with the way Hillary got off and Trump got put on, and all of these people being connected to Clinton herself. Yeah. What happens if Democrats fight Trump and the GOP runs Pence? Oh man, Balthazar, I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, Trump is somewhat of a problem for them. He's losing seats. Like, he's so over the top and gross from his political standpoint. And so when he's sending off tweets and everything else, there may be a base or part of the public that loves what he says, but there is another part that he terrifies. When you're talking about like just independents who listen to the stuff that he's saying, I mean, it puts people off. And you have a lot of people who are energized and want to vote those guys out in order to be a bulwark against Trump. Now, this allows Democrats to once again not talk about the issues affecting them and purely focus on something else and direct the public's attention to something else. This is not a euphoric message. This is not a message of changing the system. This is not a message of dealing with income inequality. This message is purely about Donald Trump. So, J. Scott, Trump is a perfect distraction. Yes, he is. Anna West, Sanders never ran to be president. He ran for Hillary because she couldn't run by herself. No, I mean, I don't think that's not fair, Anna. Come on. I think when he first ran, I don't think he thought he could win. I don't even think he thought he had a base of people out there in the way that he did. He started something. It was like a light of some sort, but it was enough to start something. Now, at some point, I think he realized, holy shit, I can win this thing. But at that point, it might have been too late. It might have been too late. I don't think it's fair to say he did it just to help Hillary Clinton. I think he did it because he was wanting to push Hillary Clinton further to the left, and he wanted to be an influence. Not realizing that he could actually win. Jamal is doing socio-political analysis while Democracy Now! Is covering Stormy Daniels and his sex life. Are you serious? Well, I mean, because I think this is important. I mean, we're talking about what is the pain and tragedy of a human being in desperate poverty. I show in the other thing how poverty adversely affects people's gray matter, how they think and process the world, making them less empathetic, less able to put together numbers and understand things. That's poverty. Like, this is what we're dealing with. We're talking about half of the country is living through these type of conditions. It's like, it's problematic. It's a big deal. Democrats were told to shut up about class. Fortunately, Sanders has not. Sanders has not. So, all right, I'm going to end this. This one has gone a little bit long, but I think it gets my point across. So, all right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through PayPal or Patreon. And by the way, I want to thank a few people. Balthazar, dude, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And it's more than Balthazar. Rob Illinois. Yeah, Rob and Balthazar. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. You have, like I said, I'm always somewhat shocked that people give, but it's immensely appreciated. I'm trying to grow the channel, and because I'm trying to grow the channel, I try to do content in a regimented way. I try to put out a lot of content. Let me say it that way. On days where I don't necessarily feel like doing it, I hope that other content makes do. But for all intents and purposes, I usually do this like every day or almost every day. I enjoy doing it. And so it's a little bit weird doing this as a job per se. Because it's almost like a job is a thing that you hate doing. But nevertheless, I enjoy doing it. And I guess my feeling is you guys allow me to do it. And so, thank you very much. I will try to keep doing these vids, and I appreciate your support, even if it's just sharing the video or liking the video. So, thank you very much, guys. Have a good one. I will see you guys probably in another 15-20 minutes.